FBP family, who out there listening wants a chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card? If you're like me, your hand is raised. Well, during the month of October, we will be selecting one lucky winner each week. So that's 4 chances to win. Here's what you need to do. Subscribe to our incredible show notes and tell us in 50 words or less why you love the Fitness Business Podcast. Go to fitnessbusinesspodcast.com/win for all the details. And good luck to everyone out there. Your Fitness Business Podcast Snapshot. The 4 disciplines of organizational health, how can a team build trust, and building trust amongst your team during unconventional times. All of that and more coming up in today's show. You're listening to the fitness industry's leading fitness business podcast for owners and managers, where each week we invite business experts, coaches, authors, and owners from all around the world to share their expert advice with you, the FBP family. This month's interviews are brought to you by Team Rockstar Fit. Welcome back for another informative episode of the Fitness Business Podcast. I am your host, Dory Nugent, and you are listening to episode number 316 with our special guest, Al Amador from the Table Group, a Patrick Lencioni company. But before we get started, here's a quick message from Team Rockstar Fit.
Team Rockstar Fit is an award-winning mastermind team that helps fit pros lead happy and balanced lives. Get mentoring and support. Learn how to grow your business online with Beachbody. You can apply for a free consultation today at teamrockstarfit.com.
If you go by the definition in Webster's dictionary, trust is defined as a belief that someone or something is reliable, good, honest, or effective. Trust is everywhere. It's within our families, our marriages, our teams, our friendships, and our workplace. When trust doesn't exist, a disconnect will take place and most likely create failure. Today in my interview with Al, we'll talk about not only how important trust is, but how to build trust amongst your coworkers, your team. Al defines trust as one of the 4 disciplines of organizational health. Now let's hear from Al himself. Al Amador, welcome to the Fitness Business Podcast. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
I always love when it's the first time for a guest to be on our show. It's always exciting. So we're going to talk, Al, a little bit about you for a second. You are from the Table Group. You are one of the principal consultants, and you're also the founder and president of Amador Consulting. And I also read that you've guided some pretty big teams out there, such as Apple, Bear, Netflix. You just guide them all.
Yeah, it's such a privilege. And I'm one of 35 principal consultants in domestic US. We have 10 international partners. And we often work in concert, we'll work in pairs, but we do significant work at the C-suite. That's where we typically start with a company. And a lot of people that do this work, they come from the world of organizational development or HR. That's not my background. My background was actually technology. And I was once a client of the Table Group. I had to bring them in. We were struggling with a project. And it was just our behaviors. It wasn't the technology. It wasn't the staffing. It wasn't the technical plan. It was how we were interacting as a team. Fell in love with the process. The author asked me to consider joining him in his organization. And I've been doing it for the last 12 years. It's amazing. It's an absolute privilege. Every single week, I see something new.
Well, I love the fact that you love your job. It's always fun and exciting to talk to somebody who loves their job.
It's energizing, and and every session that you do, you learn, right? And that learning I bring into my next session. And so it's a constant evolution, and we are committed to the movement of organizational health, making organizations healthier, because overall, that's the last real advantage companies have these days.
Well, I agree with you. Since coming on to the Fitness Business Podcast as the host, I'm with you. It's always something new, something different, and I'm learning every single time.
Isn't that great?
It is great. It's so great. So yes, I understand about loving your job. So it's funny because you kind of came full circle. You said you brought the table group in, and now you're one of the 35 principals for the company.
That's right.
That's pretty cool.
It is. And we're all very, very like-minded, and we support each other constantly, because some of our sessions are intense. They go for a couple of days, and you're with very senior people, and they're strong personalities, and they're wrestling with very difficult issues. It's just great to be a part of a group that can do that type of work.
Perfect. Well, Al, one of your specialties is bringing executive leadership teams together to work on key areas. Could you just tell our listeners and maybe go in depth a little bit about what those key areas are?
Yeah, absolutely. So we take a look at organizational health. There's really 4 disciplines that leaders need to get their arms around. And the very first one is they have to develop a cohesive leadership team. That means that there's, high levels of trust, that we have good debate, we have conflict norms, we can hold each other accountable, and you know what? We're all rowing in the same direction, and we're after the same targets, right? And that's a hallmark part of our work. But in addition to that, leadership teams and leaders have to offer clarity to their organization, right? And we walk them through 6 critical questions, like why do you even exist? Above and beyond money, right? You ask Southwest Airlines that question, and they exist to democratize air travel, right? And that's their purpose. What do you do? What's most important right now? Do you have a rally cry? How do we succeed? How do we behave, right? Who has to do what? So that's another aspect of our work. And then you got to reinforce it with really good meetings. And meetings are the anchor for all teams. Is it an admin meeting, a tactical meeting, strategic? And then finally, how are we going to reinforce all of that? So that's what we do with leaders. And I'm looking forward to going deeper into some of these areas and models, but there's recommended activities as well as tangible things that leaders can do for each one of the items I talked about.
Let's focus on trust. That was kind of the first one you brought up when you started speaking. How can a team build trust with one another?
Yeah. And, trust is really something to go deep into understanding, right? Because there's something called predictive trust. Predictive trust is that, Dory, I've worked with you for several years. You say you're going to do something, you do it, right? Al, he's an enthusiastic guy, but you got to send him that little prompt right afterwards. And that's predictive trust. That's on all teams. What we're talking about here is vulnerability-based trust. Being able to be vulnerable with each other, being able to apologize, ask for help, say things like, hey, Dory, you're better at forecasting than I am. And can I run this by you? And even saying it among our team members, right? That's really the hallmark. And so your question was, okay, how do we get to that point, right? How do we build trust? And there's ways to do that. One of them really is a very simple one, is really understanding and getting to know people personally. We run something called a personal histories exercise, where everyone talks about how they were raised, where were they in the birth order, and what was a challenge in their youth that maybe impacts them today. I mean, it's very simple, but we're so surprised at how little people know about each other, right? And so one of it is, getting to know each other personally. Another one is that the leader sets the bar for vulnerability. I mean, it's the leader. If the leader can ask for help, if the leader can even admit that, boy, I'm really concerned about this or worried, people will walk through walls, and it just ups the level. And finally, we're big fans of personality assessments like the Myers-Briggs or any of those. It's very worthwhile to understand people's preferences. And I think a combination of all of those 3 things and a constant environment of what we call psychological safety, right? And what psychological safety is that you can speak your mind without recrimination, right? Those are fundamentals, and leaders that are purposeful and intentional about creating that type of atmosphere, the levels of trust are very strong.
So I love the fact that you talk about, getting to know one another personally. I've been a part of many teams, but I like how you talk about like your background and where you come from. And like, that's diving in way deeper than I've ever, when getting to know a team. Normally it's just like, hey, where are you from? Where'd
Yeah.
you go to school? And I like how you talk about just going a little deeper and how you were
Well,
raised.
you're right. And Stephen Covey, we all know Stephen Covey, he wrote Seven Habits, right? Well, his son, Stephen Covey Jr., wrote The Speed of Trust. And he did all these studies. And at the end of it, really is that trust is an asset or a liability for the team. And whenever you spend some extra time, like 25 minutes, 30 minutes, just going around the room, answering personal questions, he will consider that an actual business investment because of context, right? And there's another thing that goes away when you spend time learning each other. It's called the attribution error. And what the attribution error is that we tend to give the benefit of the doubt to people that we know very well on the team. And we tend not to give the benefit of the doubt to those that we don't. And just by talking about our own personal backgrounds, you start eliminating what we call attribution error. So there is a big business benefit to doing this.
That is so true about giving the people the benefit of the doubt, like the difference between the people that you kind of relate with a little bit more versus maybe the person that you just can't seem to, maybe click with as well. But that's great to look at it. I love that.
Yeah, there was a really interesting example that I saw live, right? And it was taking place during one of the sessions that we do, and they're very formal and they're long and all that and quite costly. But we're going through the session and there's someone that shows up very, very late. We'll call him Roger, and he was the CFO. And I always look at the CEO at that time because, typically what you see, you'll see eyes rolling or, a slumping or just disappointment. He did something completely different. The CEO said, stop to me, right? Because I was facilitating the point. And he looked at the CFO and he said, Ron, is everything okay? Are you all right? Do you need help? And that to me was so powerful because that exemplified what assuming positive intent is all about, right? He assumed positive intent. And that's why that team is as remarkable as they are, honestly.
One of the things, about me loving my job, you talked about you in the beginning, loving your job. These are the moments where I just love my job. Like for me right now, it was a light bulb, I'm going to try to take that and be so much more mindful when I'm in an environment with a team of people about, just giving them the benefit of the doubt and watching how you word things and not rolling my eyes.
Right. And in this, the new world we're in, where we're doing all these Zoom meetings and so on, there's been a lot of psychologists that talked about, well, there's a certain humanity that's entered into the stream. And part of it is even humor. And we've all been on calls where a cat's jumped on someone's furniture or, you see a little toddler running back and forth. And there's now a discussion saying, when we do reemerge, how can we take some of that humanness, that fun or whatever, or awkwardness, because we've all been awkward through this new medium. And I think that's an interesting, compelling consideration.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Al, let's get back to trust. I love the topic. And let's talk about, could you give me a few examples what things we can do or our listeners out there can do in their staff meetings to help build this trust, the foundation?
Yeah, let me give you a wonderful example. I had the privilege of working with the North Face about 4 years ago, right? And happened to be one of the warmer winters in U.S. history. And that's a big problem for them. Could you imagine? I mean, it's all about the jackets, right? And I remember when the leader, a phenomenal leader, Todd Spoleto was his name when he was the CEO back then, just really could connect at a very human level with his team. And he looked at it and said, you know what? We're the North Face. I mean, we're known. We send people up to Everest. We have some of the finest designers. I'm sick and tired of us just being one season. And he looked at him and he said, we need to become a 365-day-a-year brand. And that's going to be a challenge, right? I think it's scary. And you know what? We're going to have to go into each other's areas like we never had before. And really what I learned from that example from him is that he admitted the challenge. He himself was vulnerable and gave permission to everyone else to go into each other's areas a bit in order to succeed. And so I think foundationally, that's where I see leaders enhance and increase the level of trust. And again, continuously asking each other for help. or asking how you can help others, or identifying where the overlaps are and dealing with the difficult conversations earlier, often raises the level of trust. And again, we're calling it vulnerability-based trust, which is very powerful in teams.
It's funny listening to you talking about asking for help. And then I'm just, everything that you're talking about, because the way I was brought up, asking for help in the way where I was brought up was a little bit of a sign of weakness. You know, it's kind of instilled in me, you know, you don't ask for help, you figure it out. So it's interesting where you're really talking about being vulnerable and, you know, saying, hey, it's okay to ask for help. So for somebody like me in a team, that's a hard one.
Yeah. And, you know, and it is. And especially with high performers, because, you know, what got you there was most likely outstanding individual achievement, right? Or, you know, some aspect that you brought to that corporation that, you know, was really, really well understood and appreciated and utilized. But it is a difficult one. One of the questions we ask, we have an online survey, you know, can you admit your weaknesses to others? You know, are you willing to ask for help? You know, are you able to support a group decision even though you initially disagreed, right? And so those are very compelling questions to ask your own team.
Well, I would fall right in on that test about the asking for help.
Yeah, right. Well, I have one leader where, you know, the team couldn't ask for help. And what happens is that they start working in silos. They have to hire more consultants and so on, where the answer is actually in the room. And what this leader did, she did a great job, was she started a meeting by saying this: 30 seconds, we're going to go around the room. And all you're going to do is, what do you need help with? Right. And we're going to just take that out of the wind because we're not asking each other for help. She just institutionalized it. And guess what? There were no more surprises, right? People ponied up and it just became part of their routine.
All right. Perfect.
Yeah.
So you talked about, loved your example with North Face, and, you know, they need to change, and, you know, what of a challenge that's going to be. So obviously with COVID, it has put so many changes on companies and teams. The work environment is the one area that has changed the greatest. So how do teams build trust, keep the trust when they're not together every day? It's through a video screen a lot of times.
Right. You know, the biggest concern, and I think there's a sense of loss to a lot of this, right? And when I talk to leaders, especially those managers that just love to be with their people, they're the ones that, you know, roam the facilities and just connect that way. That's gone. That is literally gone, right? And in there's even that spontaneous connection with someone that doesn't report directly up to you. It's just, that's gone. And so what teams are doing is that they're doubling down on interpersonal activities, right? I'm working with one team right now. They're under a tremendous amount of pressure. They're fighting the fight against COVID-19 on a regimen for allowing more people to donate blood. But the point is that they're spending an extra 10, 20 minutes prior to their meeting starting to do some of these trust building activities, just to check in on, you know, what's the greatest habit that you've formed during this time? You know, what's the biggest lesson that you're going to take back to work after this time is up, right? And just even 10, 15, 20 minutes ahead of time is what keeps this alive, right? And so I see them doubling down, and I see people being much more crisper in meetings, and that does help as well, because when you have a Zoom meeting, you know, everyone has to be plugged in, and you know, and trust is the anchor to a lot of that. But being as efficient as possible, I think, also helps.
Yeah, I like that, because a lot of times we get in the mode of click into the meeting and you get right to it, you know? And,
it gets very tactical. It's very tactical these days. And another thing too, is that we don't make the time for the strategic discussion. So I might just take a little side tour over here, is that we believe that there's 4 different types of discussions or meetings that teams have to have. One is simply administrative. Where are you? Where are you going to be? What are you working on? The other one is the one that most of us know. It's the weekly tactical, right? Talking about the issues of the week. But then there's also a strategic discussion, and then there's developmental. You know, how are we doing? And the problem is, a lot of teams put all of those in the same meeting. We refer to that as meeting stew, right? It just doesn't work. And so I think that, again, being very intentional about the outcome of the meeting, I think also adds to a level of trust and certainly a level of engagement.
Have you ever seen a team, or maybe I should say,
Mm-hmm.
the team that had the trust and lost the trust somehow? How do you build that back? Is it easy because they already once had the trust, or is it harder because there's a little resentment because for whatever reason the trust was lost?
Yeah. So I'll start with the latter of your statement. Is it is a little bit harder, but we always recommend that we talk about the issue immediately, right, and not let it hang or fester. And there's a discussion I often have when I see the trust score go down, right, which is rare, but it does happen. I'd say, why don't we all just sit down and think about the last 60 days? And let's come up with examples of where we built trust on the team. Maybe, Dory, you reached out to me and you let me in on a meeting that I typically wasn't let into, and now I got greater visibility. Okay, so that built greater trust, right? And you get the team to talk about that, all right? That's all right. Now let's flip the coin. Over the last 60 days, what eroded trust on this team? What was it? And many things can come on up. There were 2 new players on the team that weren't properly onboarded. All right. Well, who blew it there? Okay, this is how we did it. Or, I tend to think that there's a disconnect now between Al and Dory, and now you're less collaborative and you're somewhat competitive. What's going on there? But being really open about it, especially if the team had some initial level of trust, ironically increases the level of trust if you can hit that issue head on.
This is so relatable, especially for our listeners, which are primarily in the fitness industry.
Right.
Because the industry is taking a major, major hit. I know a lot of other industries has as well, but the fitness industry has taken a major hit with COVID. And what we're finding is a lot of the teams are breaking up because gyms have been closed and people can't continue in that industry because obviously they need to make an income for their family or even just for themselves. Mm-hmm. So it's so relatable because it's hard, I know, right now in the industry because teams are constantly changing.
Right. And, we have some clients in your industry, and actually my brother, Brian, has been in the industry his entire career, right? And I know it well. And the challenges are immense and compared to others, greater. What I am sensing in some fields in some areas is that there's even a little bit of resentment now brewing. And what I mean by that is that there are people that have to be on the front line, right? They have to be. And then there's a lot of workers that are off the front line. And I am seeing a little bit of a disconnect between those 2 requirements, depending on where you are in the organization. And as a leader, if you're sensing that, that is a really good discussion to enter into with the overall team if you have people that are online and those that are remote.
Yeah, I love that. That is so true. I completely
it is. And it just goes to the hospitals, and I have a couple of medical clients, those are people that physically have to be there with the patients. And then the administrative team, they're home. There's no reason for them, and they should not be there. Mm-hmm. Right. But it does cause a little bit of a rift. That's certain.
Absolutely. So we primarily talked about trust through this entire interview. But I think originally you said there's 4 foundations. Is there one other foundation that you think is super important or more important than the other, or are they all equal?
They're all equal, but I would say this is that trust is amazing, but if you have really good conflict with trust, like ideological, passionate debate, and there's trust on the team, that is literally the search for truth. It's the search for truth. So I would have the listeners really consider another aspect, and that is to ensure there is a proper level of debate, and that when you have a difficult issue, we're not taking it offline and we're not having a meeting after the meeting, right? And there's a concept called the conflict continuum. And on one side of this continuum where the team doesn't have any conflict, and what I mean by that, Dory, is there's a difficult issue. We just want to, what we'll do is let's not talk about it. We'll just deal with it later, right? And that's called artificial harmony. Then on the other side, it's mean-spirited, right? And rarely do teams exist on either extreme, but sometimes they tend to be a little bit more towards artificial harmony, right? And what we're saying is that if you adopt conflict norms, right, rules of engagement, and remind the team about that. Like, for example, I'm working with a team that has a lot of introverts, and one of their conflict norms is silence equals disagreement. Because there's a couple of talkers on the team, and they assume that because people are quiet, they're on board, when in fact it's the exact opposite, right? Another company, US Foods, they're really good at this, is that they're always very explicit about the outcome before you even go to the meeting. And that's its own conflict norm. And another one, Boeing, what they do is they do internal polling, right? So when they're talking about something for about 10, 15 minutes, they'll go, okay, let's stop. Where is everyone on this one? They'll do a fist to 5, right? 5, if you put 5 fingers real quick, that's a great idea. 4, we still need to talk about something. 3, not good. And you get it all the way down to a fist that says no way. And they'll use that. But the point is that great teams have good conflict norms, and it moves the level of debate to a higher level, right? And even coming up with those norms with your team is a great activity.
And I'm sitting here listening to you, and I don't want to say I'm laughing, but it's so true for a marriage in the same exact way, right? Trust and being able to have conflict, but to have the trust that you can work it out and good debates. And so I'm sitting here like, oh, he could take this to some marriage counseling.
I know. And then, a lot of times when people tell their personal histories too, people just are amazing. I mean, when I did this with another team that I was on, I had to struggle with the CFO, and I'm the CIO of this organization, right? And every time I asked for money or talked about a project that was running over, I would see that expression on her face. And I had attribution error with her because I didn't know her. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, typical being counter. Don't you know I'm part of the solution? Let me be a thought leader. But then when we did the personal histories exercise, Dory, guess what I heard? She looked at us and said, you know what? Intellectually, I know I'm a CFO of a multi-million dollar, $750 million organization. I know that. But you need to know something about me. I was raised in poverty. My parents had us as teenagers and they left. I took care of my sisters. And everything that we earned and all what we have is through all of our hard work at a very early age. And she looked at me and she goes, Al, I know that you have big projects and overrun. Just know for me, it's just hard to hand over the next 5 million, when there's not a lot of backing to the request. It's hard for me. And that's so amazing, right? My insight, my understanding of her, our relationship completely changed after she said that in 2 minutes.
Yeah, it all goes back to, like you said, that vulnerability, getting to know somebody, where they came from, and not just knowing them on the surface in the workplace.
Yeah. And, there's something I'd recommend for our listeners too, because, your managers and your leaders, and there's a wonderful study. It's a very nice, quick read. It's not our work. It was Google. And Google did what they call their Aristotle study. And what they did is they took a look at thousands of teams within their organization, even the alphabet companies. They did tech teams, they did project teams, financial support teams, whatever. And they wanted to figure out, why did some teams succeed and others languished or weren't exceptional, right? So they wanted to find out those factors. And it came down to 2 things. This is after 5 years studying thousands and thousands of teams, 2 things. And these 2 things trumped education level. They were over budget, gender distribution, culture, whatever. The first one was this, is that on those teams that were likely to succeed, there was psychological safety. And what they meant by that is that you could speak your mind without recrimination. And also on those teams, there were ground rules about how to have conflict. And with those 2 in place, it increased the likelihood of success for that particular team. It's fascinating, right? I mean, and it's all around behavior, and it's really about a couple of these concepts we talk about.
Al, if our listeners want to dive in even deeper into this information that you delivered us today, where can they go and learn a little bit more?
Well, let me start off by please go to our website. It's www.tablegroup.com, and we are the open source for organizational health. There are dozens of compelling exercises. Everything I talked about as far as models and so on are there for you to download and easily self-facilitate, right? After that, I would take a look at a couple of articles around Myers-Briggs, it's referred to as Myers-Briggs or MBTI, what it is and how you might be able to use it for a team building exercise. Right? I'm a big fan of that one. And I'd say start there. That would be a good one. Also would steer you to some of our books, but we have extracts and all those things are on our site. The other thing I would say is we have a great podcast as well with Pat talking about organizational health in every episode.
Okay, so after they're done listening to the Fitness Business podcast, then they can scoot on over to your podcast and get a double dose.
That's right. Great.
Get your pen ready now for Keep Me's Fit Bizpiration.
What are your 3 action items to develop a team in an organization?
These are the 3 most important, impactful things I think you can do. The very first one is be purposeful in establishing trust. Run a personal histories exercise. Ask them 3 simple questions. Where were you raised? What did your parents do for a living? What were you in the birth order? And what was a unique challenge of your youth? Do that exercise, right? I think will help immensely. And make sure that you're getting to know each other. Even on that personal level, it takes a little bit of extra time, but it's a business investment well worth it, right? Number 2, establish some conflict norms. And really what it is how do we make sure that people are speaking their mind? And what are some norms? Like I mentioned, silence equals disagreement, or maybe keep it about the topic and not the person. Whatever the team agrees to, remind yourself about those norms before you go into a big discussion. And call it out. And then afterwards say, how do we do compared to our norms? And the third one, I didn't talk much about it, but it's about ending meetings with clarity. And I would ask all the leaders to do this. It's something that I have to remind myself all the time. You can get into these meetings and you end. And I think about the captains of Royal Caribbean. I had a privilege of working with them, and they flew 30 captains out. Basically, they run a small city in the middle of the ocean. And there are only 5 people on their team, right? But what do the captains do every single time when they meet? 10 minutes before the meeting ends, they stop it, no matter where they are. Captain writes bullet points about what they decided, and then goes around the room and asks the XO, the ship doctor, and so on, are you on board with this? And then who needs to know? And it's really about, what did we decide? Are you in? And who needs to know? That would be my 3rd action item. And between those 3, the level of trust and certainly the level of engagement will go up on your team.
Keep Me, smarter member retention. KeepMe.ai.
Let's get back to the show. Well, Al, thank you so much for coming on our show today. This was a really enlightening episode. I think our listeners are absolutely going to love everything that you had to say. The one thing that you put in at the very end that I really loved is the ending a meeting with clarity. I think that's super important.
Oh, yeah. And, again, I would say, please go to our website, because we have templates around meeting formats. We have a meeting tool. For those of you that are very interested in this type of work or want to be an internal practitioner, because many times we'll partner with an organization, but we can't be there forever, and internal people start taking over. We have a wonderful program on our website. It's called CAPA Pro. It stands for Consultant and Practitioner Alliance. You can access it on us. And again, there's a vast array of tools that you can use. So I encourage you to do that. It's been a pleasure being on this program. And, I have a personal connection to the health industry because of my brother. I took on a pledge of health last year. I lost 40 pounds. I did it through a wonderful gym with a wonderful trainer. And it's so important and such an important aspect of life. I just can't wait to get back at it. Thank you so much.
To all my listeners out there, I hope that you have enjoyed Al's interview as much as I enjoyed interviewing him. His teachings on the importance of trust amongst a team, and more importantly, how to build trust amongst your team, is so relevant in today's times. Please stay tuned for our quick fire 5 questions. But first, there's a message from our podcast partner, Tribe Team Training.
Are you interested in increasing your center's income and your trainer's income from small group training? Tribe Team Training is the new way to get more members engaged in small group training and paying extra. Click the Tribe Team Training link in the show notes or go to tribeteamtraining.com.au/podcast for your free formula to see how much income you can make from small group training.
Quickfire 5.
Here are your quick fire 5 questions with next week's guest, Barry Herbst from the Elliott Group. Fitness Business Podcast family, I'd like to welcome Barry Herbst to our quick fire 5 questions. Barry, it's a warm welcome from everyone here at the Fitness Business Podcast.
Hi, Dory. Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
All right, let's get started with our quick fire 5 questions. Who inspires you in your life and why?
My wife, Deborah, is my life and my rock and my inspiration. No matter how hard she works, from 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. in cybersecurity, with the amount of clients she has, she is the heartbeat of my life, and she's the best mom in the world, and I don't know how she finds the time. She's superwoman.
That's awesome. I hope my husband says that about me.
You better. You damn well better.
All right, Barry, why do you do what you do?
I've always loved people. I've always loved getting to know people, building trust-based, deep relationships, and I find people very, very fascinating. And the more people I meet, the more successful I feel.
Perfect. And Barry, here's a good one for you. If you were not doing what you were doing, what would you be doing?
I'd probably be a cheesemonger because I love cheese. I am ironically lactose intolerant, so that's a little bit of a challenge.
Oh, I always love this question. I get the best answers. They're so much fun. So let's see. What's one book, podcast, blog, Facebook group would you recommend and why?
I strongly recommend a book by Dale Carnegie called Think and Grow Rich. That, to me, is the most pivotal book I've ever read. I love to practice visualization, and no matter if you want to be rich, tall, a basketball player, it all starts in your mind and in your head.
All right, great recommendation. And finally, what will be an action item the Fitness Business Podcast will take away from your main interview next week?
The action item I hope everyone learns from my interview is the confidence to know who and when to hire for their future, for their business.
Perfect. Well, we look forward to having you on the episode next week. So everybody stay tuned for Barry Herbst from the Elliott Group. Now, here's a word from our podcast partner, Precor.
Tribe, if you haven't explored a functional training space for your gym, then now is the time. With Queenex Functional Training by Precor, there is a unit to fit every space. Plus, education is included to ensure that training is delivered with confidence. You need to jump online and check this out right now. Go to precor.com/fitness business podcast. Hi everyone, Chantal here. Thank you for joining me for this week's throwback episode, when we take a little trip down memory lane and I share some of my all-time favorite episodes from the first 5 years of the show. This week's featured guest is still today one of my all-time favorites. It was episode 80 and it featured the Idea Personal Trainer of the Year 2016, Carol Michaels. Carol is the owner of Carol Michaels Fitness and Recovery Fitness LLC, which is a cancer exercise program developed to improve recovery from cancer surgery and treatments. During the interview, Carol talks about her journey to building Recovery Fitness, and she also gives us an insight into how she approached and established relationships with the medical industry to help develop and support the program. If you haven't yet heard that episode, then I highly recommend you take a listen. All you need to do is head to the show notes for today's episode. Otherwise, just go to fitnessbusinesspodcast.com and search for episode number 80. Happy listening.
Hey, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all my loyal listeners out there, and thank you so much for joining me for this week's show. And a reminder that all the resources and links for today's episode can be found at fbp.com. And a warm thank you to our founding partner, Active Management.
Hi FBP family, it's JT from Active Management, the founding partner of the Fitness Business Podcast. Thanks to the amazing technology at our fingertips, we can now work with clients all over the world. But right now, you can join the free online Active Management Facebook community. It's an amazing group of people just like you. Sure, I share weekly resources, but it's the power of the community that you will experience that will make this your go-to Facebook group. Remember, it's free, fun, and inspirational. Go to facebook.com/groups/active management community.
What you leave behind is not what's engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others.